Today, I'm joined by Grace MacJones. She's an Azure cloud engineer at Microsoft, mentor at the University of Washington Foster School of Business. She's the Seattle lead for Women Who Code, a speaker, and the host of the Tech Unlocked podcast, which I'll put a link in the description. You definitely got to check it out. Grace, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, I'm so honored to be here. I'm excited for this discussion.
So, for those who don't know you, and I'm one of them, I'm getting to know you. Tell us a bit about where you're from, who you are, and what more about what you do.
So I was born in Nigeria. This is the short version I like to tell people. I was born in Nigeria, raised in Virginia, educated in Texas, and now live in Seattle. And obviously, there's a lot of things that went into those movements. But currently working at Microsoft, and I've been there for about 2.5 years. And so it's been a great experience so far, and I love that I'm able to start out my career in such an amazing company.
Wow. So, what made you decide? I mean, I'm sure it goes back a little ways and how you got here. What made you decide to get into IT?
So I, to be honest, never really saw myself in the IT tech field because as someone who's like a first gen immigrant, I didn't grow up with anyone who like worked in tech or knew anything about technology or even graduated college in the United States. And so the first time I went to college, I was studying international business, international relations, because I wanted to travel, meet foreign officials and things like that. But then at the same time, like college was extremely expensive. I remember trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to pay for like each semester? And then I had to drop out because I'm like, this is expensive. Like my parents can afford this. And then the second time, I decided to go to a community college. And then I remember taking an intro to computer class. And so I was like, this is exciting. And then I was just like, okay, where do I go next from here? Like, how do I map out what I want to do? And there was just a sense of like, I don't know what I'm doing, so don't waste any money. So I dropped out again. And the third time I went to college, it was nothing short of a miracle that I actually graduated this time because I felt like I owed it to myself to at least try to figure it out.
Mm.
Even though I hadn't seen anyone who had done what I was trying to do. And so I decided to study computer science because I felt like the possibilities were endless. And at the time, on my college campus, which is at Sam Houston State University, I was working as a graphic designer. So it kind of came from a creative background. And I was intrigued by Photoshop, Illustrator, like all that fun stuff if you're a creative. And I'm just like, wow, like without these tools, like I wouldn't have a job, because I'm out here creating posters, things for print. And I was just intrigued, right? I'm just like, how is this software created? Like, who created the software? So went to, everyone's best friend, Google, and just really type how was Photoshop created. And then I saw that it was created by, a programming language. I'm like, what's a programming language? And kind of like went down this rabbit hole of trying to discover something that I was genuinely curious about. And that really sparked my interest because I wanted to eventually in the future create something that helps other people be more creative, or help people kind of like trust their creativity in a sense. And so that's kind of like I think the base level of even what I thought I could do with technology now looking back. And the journey to Microsoft was one that wasn't linear because I personally never saw myself in Microsoft or Fang, the one of the top like the top companies like Facebook and
Mhm.
Netflix or any of these companies. Frankly, because no one really came to recruit at my school because I went to a small state college. And so the visibility to, access those companies, I just didn't see it. The only thing that helped me have, a Facebook or a Microsoft, all these big companies in my mind was when I went to the Grace Hopper conference. And for those who are not really sure what that is, it's the largest conference for women in computing. So I went as a college senior. I remember applying for a scholarship because tech conferences are not cheap. We all know that. And I remember going and I was just like, oh wow, so there are the women like in the tech field because obviously in my class I was the only black woman usually. And that didn't really bother me because, I was in Texas, I would just go out and see other black people and other people of different ethnicity. Um, but I think one thing that stood out to me was that I didn't really have any black professors teaching any of my computer science classes. And so going to this conference and seeing women share their research papers, the products they were working on, and in leadership, I'm like, wow, okay, so it is possible to work in tech as a woman, as a Black woman. And so from then on, I just felt like I owe it to myself to figure out what I wanted to do with that degree. And, at that conference, I met someone. Then when I've been to tech conferences, it's always like the technical side of everything, like the speaking series and the discussion panels, and then it's always the networking side, which I miss since we're in a pandemic. There's no networking. And I remember going to an event hosted by Google called, for women of color, and I was standing in line waiting. I got there early because usually I knew that the lines were going to be long. And this lady came up to me. She's like, "Hey, do you know when this event starts?" And like, I don't know, I'm just trying to be here early. And we just started talking. And she said to me, like, what do you do? And, and I was like, oh, I'm a college student. And I just kind of gave her the whole spiel. And she's like, do you know what you want to do after graduating? And I was like, no, not really. And usually I wouldn't say that. I would probably like, spin up something like, yeah, I'm trying to be blah, 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 and try to like fake it. But for some reason, I just felt like might as well be vulnerable and be honest. And she told me about an apprenticeship program at Microsoft, and she was like, "Hey, like Microsoft has an apprenticeship program called Leap. I think you should definitely try it out, which is a 16 weeks program where you're placed on a team, and if you do well, that team can extend a full-time offer to you." And so I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." I didn't really think anything of it because I had been to the Microsoft booth and talked to some recruiters. So I was like, if it happens, cool. If it doesn't, cool. But I think something that was unique about that conversation was that she was like, "Are you on LinkedIn?" I was like, "Yes." And so we connected, and she introduced me to the program manager over the whole program. So we kept in touch. So, I mean, fast forward, I was able to interview, get into the program, and then was able to get on a team. And even after the apprenticeship, I was extended a full time offer. And yeah, I mean, the rest is kind of history. I'm here now. So,
That's pretty awesome, though. I mean, those programs are amazing. And I mean, and the fact that you heard about it and waiting in line because you're going to a conference is amazing and awesome. But then that you acted on it too, right? Because I mentor a lot of people, and there are a lot of people who are like, maybe I'm not good enough, or well, if they want me, they'll call me, right?
mm.
It's important to act on things like that when you hear about it.
Yeah, I think the magic is in the follow up, right? I think that a lot of people will say, "Hey, feel free to reach out," right? Like I probably will sit on this, podcast, like, "Hey, feel free to reach out," and probably maybe only one out of like whoever's listening or two people might reach out because obviously people have either imposter syndrome of like, oh, maybe she's too busy or this
Mhm.
person don't have my time. And I try telling a lot of young people or just people in general, don't self-reject, right? Don't tell yourself no before somebody tells you no. At least try. If you're trying, like, okay, I tried, and then try again. And so at that rate, like, okay, at least I tried, and maybe that wasn't the best time. And then even for me, if I, send an email to someone about maybe being on, my podcast, or I wanted to talk with them and they don't get back to me, I send a follow-up email, for maybe I wait maybe a week or two. And then like, oh my gosh, thank you for reminding me. Like my inbox has been so busy and blah, blah, blah. So it's sometimes some like people don't want to help you. They either forget or, that's not the right time. So it's up to you to follow up if it's something that you're truly invested in or truly interested in.
Yes, absolutely. So you've been around the block a little bit, seen how we do IT. What is something about the way we do IT today that you would change? Whether it could be something that you notice in our processes, right? You got fresh eyes, new look at how we do things. It could be how we hire people or how we advertise things. What's something you think we might consider changing?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few things that comes to mind. I think from the tech side of things, I think their ability to streamline and help other industries get on technology. So obviously, it's been almost a year since we've been in the pandemic, and you can tell that different sectors, maybe like the financial institution, like banks or even schools, or I mean, education was one of the institutions that struggled so hard in terms of like getting their students online. They were using different tools, and so I think in a sense, being able to onboard different institutions. And so whether that's even the law institution or people trying to like, I don't know if you've seen, there was a funny tweet that came out 2 weeks ago of um, a court case happening, and the lawyer had like a like a cat
Oh.
filter on the Zoom and didn't know how to take it off. And he was like, Your Honor, like I just couldn't stop laughing. Obviously, I don't think that was funny, but it was funny in itself. And so and I think something that can help with getting other sectors in terms of like other institutions familiarized with tech is tech literacy, right? I think that we talk about financial literacy, but investing in the simple things like how to do a virtual call, like how to prepare for virtual interviews, how to set up like virtual conferences, And so I think this like we saw that there was a big learning curve of like people who were ready and weren't ready. And even the restaurant, industry, like I knew a lot of small businesses who went out of business because they couldn't fulfill the orders from online or they couldn't go online fast enough, which was so sad. And so the industries that were able to adopt quickly how to use technology, how to create a website or an app, and being able to serve their community and their customers were able to thrive and survive during the pandemic. So I think in terms of what IT can do or what tech can do is like providing tech literacy, whether that's from the big companies, like, hey, here's what you can do to deploy a simple app and get your restaurant going or your small business going, or here's how you can, make sure that your customer data is secured, with
Mm.
cybersecurity. And so just little nuances. And I feel like, we in IT, we know all those things, right? We know, okay, like this is what I'm going to do if I wanted to set up maybe a new store or maybe set up a conference call or things like that. But there are millions of people who are now without jobs because they can't really work. And so I think that there's a huge market, a huge opportunity to tap into that. So I think that's one thing that I would think that we can do a better job in is tech literacy in terms of like getting people ready for the future, for the jobs of the future.
Wow. That is true. I mean, my kids are in school. My daughter is 100% virtual, and there are many people in our school system that have. It was tough. They didn't own computers. Our school system had to go buy computers
Wow.
and get computers for everybody. But you're right. And I've heard interesting stories of students having to go to parking lots to get on Wi-Fi. And there's got to be right. There's got to be a better way. And then of course, just the basic literacy of small businesses, people who only have like two or three, four employees. How do they bring tech
Yeah.
infrastructure in that's not going to break the bank? That's
And
a
even
really,
train your workers on how to use that technology. I think
yeah.
just to name a couple, obviously, of corporations that did well during this time was like Starbucks and even Chick-fil-A of how efficient they were in
Mm,
getting people in the orders in and things like that. I was like, wow, like this is really impressive because you can just order on the app or they made it so easy, for people who wanted to order in or Uber Eats or things like that. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for people to go online or be online, but if they're not taught how to, there's no way they can survive with their competitors. And so I think there's a way that I think we in tech, people who are building all these amazing services, can have ways to teach others, how to use this for the benefit.
wow, that's amazing. So where do you see yourself going? You're still kind of fresh in your career. You've been at Microsoft for just a bit, but where do you see this going? And where do you see? Talk about your podcast. How's your podcast doing, and where's it headed?
Yeah. I have a podcast. It's called Tech Unlocked, and it aims to demystify the tech industry by giving people of color the keys to unlock their successful tech career. And as I mentioned, I created this podcast for two reasons. First of all, I wanted to create something that I wish existed when I was in college, because like I said, it was hard to navigate like, okay, what do I do next? I mean, obviously people like apply for jobs, but I'm like, but how? Obviously you can go on LinkedIn and whatnot, but the part about networking, right? About following up, all those nuances of how the corporate world works, because it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And especially as a minority, you can get drowned in the pool of applications. And so in the podcast, I highlight people who are doing amazing work within tech, but also showcasing different roles that are available. IT is such a widespread of jobs and things that you can do. And so a lot of people get, boggled down like, okay, if I don't like to code, is there a space for me in tech? And I'm like, yes, there's a lot of things you could do. And so whether that's UX design or being a data scientist or in product marketing, um, just highlighting, or program manager, and just highlighting those things. A lot of students who are maybe, I'm not going to the fancy college, might not be privy to that. And then a lot of people who are maybe thinking of like, okay, I have a different background, right? I've gotten a lot of good feedback from people who are transitioning into tech. So let's say they went
Mhm.
to a boot camp and they're curious about, okay, where can I bring my, other skills? I call that transferable skills, whether that they were a nurse before and then went to a boot camp and now wanted to be a PM. Like, how can I bring what I know into kind of like a new industry? And so talking about all those things, which I feel like isn't talked about a lot, and that goes into just demystifying, the tech world, and also tech concepts that I think are helpful for the people who are starting out in their career. And so for me, I was like, where I see this going, to be honest, I would like for people to feel like they belong in tech. And I know that's a overused term, but I do feel like representation is everything, right? When you're able to see someone do something, it kind of breaks that mental mold of, oh, I can't do this. You're like, oh, well, if she was able to do this, if he was able to do this, I think there's a possibility that I can, right? And so I'm hoping that people who have been, underrepresented within tech, or just in general, are able to say like, hey, like I belong here, and there's a space for me to work in this industry. So hoping to get more underrepresented folks into the tech industry.
Wow, that's amazing, and it's true. I mean, I'm of course a white dude, um, but it goes even just the people who've been in tech forever, who are gatekeeping their knowledge or their participation in projects,
Mm,
as well as representation, right? So, and that's some of how they block that representation by not letting fresh people in, and it's a problem because then it causes a lot of legacy problems. It causes a lot of the business can't transition to more modern approaches, and we need fresh ideas. I mean, like you, I work in the federal government. I would love to have you work in my agency and bring fresh ideas and help us move things forward in different ways. So I look forward to seeing where you go with your podcast and hearing more about your career as you continue. And just thank you so much for joining me today.
yeah, thanks for having me. And I think something that you said, I think people like you, creating platforms like this to have discussions like this is one way that we can help with that, either pipeline situation, or even figuring out, because someone can listen like, okay, how can I help? Maybe I've been here for a long time and I'm comfortable, and something that I know that you do, you mentor a lot. So I think mentorship is key in terms of like figuring out how can I bring fresh people with fresh ideas and diverse backgrounds. And I think being able to reach out, whether that's on your LinkedIn and say, hey, like I have my Calendly open for this weekend, 20 minutes, if you have questions about the work that I do or about getting into tech, feel free to, like schedule that, and then from there you can get a sense of like, what do people really want to know, because people, trust me, they love to talk, we're talking right now, we're podcasters, so we know that.
Yep.
And they will reach out and tell you maybe what they're struggling with. And I think that can give you an insight to what you can do, maybe on a long-term basis to help make sure that those who are maybe underrepresented feel like they're welcome within this IT industry.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for joining me.
Thanks, Jeremy. This was great.